We begin the readout tonight with the Democrats turning their focus on protecting your right to vote and to have that vote actually count. With Vice President Kamala Harris at her alma mater, Howard University, announcing a $25 million investment by the Democratic National Committee to support and protect voting access ahead of the midterm elections.
These laws create obstacle upon obstacle. These laws make it harder for you to vote because they don't want you to vote. We will not let anyone take away our power, and that's why we are all here together today.
Meanwhile, in Arizona, another Democrat fighting to protect voters, Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who has asked her state's Republican vaccine-averse attorney general to open up a criminal investigation into whether Trump and his allies broke the law in their efforts to pressure Maricopa County officials after the election. Hobbs has made it clear that fighting her state's sham fraud isn't just about affirming the last election, but preventing Republicans from stealing the next one, which is exactly what they're now openly trying to do, while exporting more partisan sham reviews to other states like Pennsylvania, where a state senator who participated in the pro-Trump events in D.C. before the insurrection is now demanding, get this, that binders full of ballots be delivered to him. It shouldn't surprise you that Pennsylvania frauded guy is considering running for governor. We see you Republicans rolling out the full insurrection toolkit to any state where you have legislative control in order to instill social chaos and crush our democracy, using, quote, election integrity as a shield to try to suppress the vote while sucking up to Trump. And because claiming widespread fraud in last fall's election isn't bearing any actual proof because it didn't happen, you're scrambling to implement Plan B, which is pushing through voter restriction laws with a vengeance, which we saw last night in Texas again, when Republicans proposed to ban drive-through and early voting in their latest draft of election legislation. With their signature voting bill blocked, Democrats are clamoring to get the Biden White House to do more and to say more about passing voting legislation on the Hill. President Biden and Vice President Harris met with civil rights leaders in a private session to discuss just that. And some of those leaders had this to say about their summer of activism.
We see an effort to impose a system of American apartheid.
We say enough is enough. When we talk about what's going to happen with the black vote, we know when we talk about the black vote, we're talking about black women.
Joining me now is the Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation right here on MSNBC. Melanie Campbell, president of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. And Kurt Bardella, advisor to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Thank you all for being here. Rev, I'm going to start with you. I saw a little bit of the press conference that you guys did after you met with the president. But give us a review for those who didn't see it. What came out of that meeting? What were the demands and what was the action plan that came out?
Well, the president met with 8 of us that lead national civil rights organizations, and it was scheduled for an hour. We met an hour and 40 minutes, basically to tell him that after the Supreme Court decision of last week, that we are returning back to a states' rights kind of election system, where in effect with the Arizona decision the Supreme Court gave, they're saying that states had the right to decide on what election process they were going to use as long as people could vote, even if it caused people a little inconvenience, they could vote anyhow. And that we intended to fight to make sure that Senate Bill 1 and the John Lewis bill passed, and we were going to do it by building a movement from the ground. We wanted to inform him of that. We wanted him to use his bully pulpit in the White House to really deal with the gravity of the hour. And he and the vice president listened intently. He said, I'm going to do all I can from the White House. He did not say that he could deliver legislation because he clearly is having problems getting over 50 votes. But he was very intense and in his listening. The vice president said she is willing to go on the road and campaign for this. I told them that in 1964, after the Civil Rights Act, Martin Luther King said they needed a Voting Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson said we just can't do it. And that Dr. King left this very White House and went south and built that movement. And we were leaving there today to build that movement around this country. We're going to have a big march August 28th, Martin Luther King III, and Andrea King and I have called along with a march on. Melanie Campbell is on. She's going to talk about bills that's starting this week. We are not going to let them take the right to vote from us, not in our time, not in this generation.
Yeah, and, Melanie, as Rev talks about the August 28th, this anniversary march, we'll recall that the March on Washington was not a march with Kennedy. It was a march on Kennedy to push him to say that you're going to pass this bill. It wasn't like a friendly march. The Kennedy administration didn't even want it. What do you take as the White House attitude toward the activism that's now taking place? I'm talking to a lot of activists who are frustrated, frankly, with the White House, that they're talking a good game, but they aren't doing anything, and that they aren't using the power that they have. Not just the White House, but Democrats in the United States Senate are simply refusing to use the power they have to defend their core voters, meaning black voters.
Okay. Thank you, Joy. Good to be here with Reverend Sharpton. One of the things that was really clear for us, we shared what we know is going on, what we're hearing on the ground all across this country, and that folks are frustrated and they want to see a good fight. And I think they heard us on that. And whatever way they can fight from the White House, they need to do that. And it didn't just start. Activism, we've been pushing this, but now what Reverend talked about, what happened last week, it just took it to a whole nother level. So for black women who are the secret sauce to Democrats winning anything in this country, we're coming together. With all of our civil rights colleagues and allies and others for a whole week of action during next week. We're going on Capitol Hill next week. When they come back, those 10 Republicans who voted to not even allow for there to be even a discussion sent us a message, and it was really clear. What are you going to do about it? And so what we're going to do about it is do what our ancestors have taught us and what we do, all of us every day, not just us, but many, many others. We're going to take it to the streets, and we're going to keep pushing in Congress and make sure that we get the voting rights, because we won't get anything else, Joy. We could pass things now, and if we lose the ability to not just vote, but to make sure that that vote gets counted. One of the things that happened in Georgia, our local affiliate is Helen Butler, who state affiliate with the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, who also sits on the local board of election, who was taken off of that local board of election, so that way some folks can just take and choose who they want to be able to decide how votes get counted. So we can organize all day long the way we always have, but then if the rules change about who gets to decide if that vote gets counted, we'll never be able to have the ability to have one man, one woman, one vote and vote for the candidates of our choice.
Yeah, and Kurt, the history rhymes, right? I mean, when the 1960s movement was taking place, Democrats also controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, right? It was full Democratic control. The difference was that what you have now are Republicans who are essentially being very open and telegraphing the fact that they are attempting to seize power by stealing outright elections. They're not hiding that. They're not like hiding the ball. They're being very open. They're like, no, we're going to steal these elections. We're going to make sure black and brown and young people basically can't vote. We're going to make it so hard and play keep away that they can't vote and only our people can vote. And if in fact somehow a Democrat wins, we'll just change the results and make our person win. This is outright. It is apartheid. And so I wonder if you feel like the activists that you're on with today, that I'm talking to, and I'm sure you're talking to, the energy is all there. Do you think Democrats in Capitol Hill understand what they're dealing with? Do you think they understand that that's what Republicans are trying to do?
I think that they understand that, but I just don't know that the urgency matches that understanding. And I think, one of the most important things to remember here, and Jason just played this clip about 10 minutes ago leading up to your show, we have on tape recorded messages from the former president and his lawyer and his team trying to convince people actively in real time to not certify results, to find new votes, to offset the election, to get the outcome that they want, as Rudy Giuliani was recorded saying. This isn't being done in a secret room somewhere. This isn't a clandestine operation. This is very public. There was an attempted coup in America on election night perpetrated by the person in the most highest power position in the world. And ever since then, it's hard to believe, even though Joe Biden won, even though Democrats control the House and Senate, voting in America has gotten harder since that night. And if Democrats need to understand that the way Republicans are going, if they have their way, if they're allowed to do this unchecked, we will never have a fair election in this country ever again. And Republicans will make it so that the outcome will always be that they win. They are trying to impose a minority, radical, extreme view on the majority of this country. And of all the priorities that we have, and they're all important, climate change, gun reform, dealing with COVID, getting the economy back together, nothing supersedes our democratic rights. Nothing will matter if we don't win this fight.